Hello again. Charismatic Mexican cartoonist extraordinaire Gelada greets you amicably again. Here for another episode of my ongoing series, Satanist sells Satanism to you. I wanted to sort of continue from where I left off. Last video I was talking about how since existence presupposes conflict in the sense that, everything is within, for example, time, and time by itself is not that time erodes things, but that things exist in relationship to each other. Your hand exists in relationship to your mind, to your eyes that look at it, to your senses through which you perceive it, etc., etc. Things bump up against each other. Things are in friction against each other and gain meaning by entering into friction with each other. I mean, they exist already, basically as antagonists on some level. That is because we separate things through language. For example, we say that there's a river, and then there's a waterfall and a whirlpool, in that river. But the water that flows through a waterfall is ever changing. Nevertheless, we call the waterfall, a waterfall. Anything really, anything can be a waterfall if you pour water on top of it. You can be a waterfall in that sense, maybe. The point here is just to try to make you aware of how things, exist through meaning in relationship, or rather that meaning and existence are one and the same, and it's all about how things relate to each other. For something to exist, you must be able to describe it somehow. And you describe it by describing relationships. Relationships between things. For example, you say that something is bright or dark. Well, the idea then is that is a type of conflict in the strictest sense of the word. Friction. So, since friction is the basis for existence, then when you're talking about something being harmonious, you're talking about a type of conflict. Something that is within conflict is harmonious. So harmony is an attribute that conflict can have. On that deeper, more technical level of meaning, the relationship between conflict and harmony is not one of opposites. And the whole idea really about my specific brand of Satanism is that it's not about, grand magical revelations about how the earth is actually flat, or maybe if you press a certain point, a certain acupressure point behind your head, you can gain magical powers, or any sort of thing that requires you to believe me. My brand of Satanism is more about how you don't really correlate the contents of your mind when you do you become a Satanist. And the idea is that to be a Satanist, is to recognize Satan as the principle of existence and your true name. Your true name is Satan. Satan, the meaning of the word Satan is the antagonist. And the idea is that antagonism is a principle of existence, relativity, conflict. Things exist in relationship to each other. By through conflict, through time, through, that sort of phenomenon of combustion, things exist. Things cannot exist in stillness. Things cannot exist if they are not, touching each other. You wouldn't be able to see something, for example, unless, light traveled through a certain medium and collided with it and then bounced back. And the light that bounces back carries information because it was affected by the collision. For example, for things to have color, it just means that there's a specific spectrum of light that specific material is reflecting more than the other, something like that. I'm not 100% on that, but anyway, the idea is that the secret relationship between the words, that's the path towards understanding that relationship, and through it understanding the true meaning of the words and concepts that are already within your mind. That is the path towards Satanism. And Satanism is the path towards health and power, among other things. And so that's what I'm selling here. That's what I'm selling. I'm selling this idea of discovering your true name, discovering the true, etymological nature, the true meaning of words like conflict and harmony. And Satanism, my brand of Satanism, is all about language. So you don't need magic or anything like that. The secret names of things is what affords power over them. Science really is all about the secret names of things. For example, the weight of something, the length of something, the to what extent something is malleable, a deep description of something, even right down to the atomic weight of a certain element. That's the kind of things that science seeks to accumulate, and through that accumulation of deep names of things, of the properties of things and how they interact and or could interact, you gain, of course, power over whatever you manage to understand or to better understand through language in that way. So it's kind of silly to try to jump ahead towards, invoking demons or flying in the air or shooting off kamehamehas through your hands if you're not even aware of what the basic meaning of things is. If you don't have any ideas about circles and squares and triangles and lines and points, about light, about conflict and harmony, about meat, about flesh, the difference between meat and flesh. Have you ever really pondered that? That's the kind of thing that Satanism is really all about. Because, the basics are everything. If you have the basics down, then you can develop into an expert by yourself. And more importantly, you can create something by yourself. Because it's all nice and it's great to inherit something that is very sophisticated. But when you inherit something very sophisticated, you also, risk being sort of trapped, or enclosed, or having less freedom to think about it. Imagine, for example, that you learned about how to animate lions. If you learn to animate lions, you then have to sort of, instead of, if you jump ahead and try to learn how to animate lions before learning how to animate, bouncing balls. I'm talking about drawn animation, like Walt Disney, things like that. And if you learn to animate lions, before you learn how to animate bouncing balls or simpler things, that's not really great. That's not what you want. So people that are not patient, people that can't manage to be interested in the basics, I think they won't really go, maybe they can go places, but they're not gonna really understand things very deeply, I don't think. Let's see, for how long have I been talking already? Because I wanted to make 15-minute videos. We're actually, close to the end here. Let's see. There is this great, really great text by Lovecraft, the very famous Call of Cthulhu, which I don't really know how to pronounce. The one, the book about the horror books, the horror and fantasy books about tentacle, eldritch gods and monsters. The start of it. Let me read aloud how it begins. This is really about the whole idea of correlating what you already know and these grand revelations and terrors and wonders and powers and abysses being, lurking within you, lurking within the things you already think, you already know about. Really, you don't need to learn new things. You just need to correlate and understand and what you already know and the implications. That's really the big thing. To notice how things maybe that you understand are actually incoherent, and where coherence, takes you. So the text is, let's start. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But someday the piecing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of the new dark age. I believe this has already happened actually. What people tend to call the postmodern era, the era of weird movies like Jurassic Park and Mulholland Drive. We as a species together, as a culture in the West, actually not only in the West, let's say the sophisticated people of the world really were starting to play with true complexity, true ambiguity, ambiguity, I believe that's the way you pronounce that word. And everyone just got really scared. And that's why we've been in this, trip into idiocracy, where everyone just, on some level, I believe everyone notices that the world has become so idiotic. But I haven't done that. I haven't regressed from complexity, from nuance. I live in a world that is a continuation of that postmodern world. I know that people believe postmodernism to be a code word for communism, and let me assure you right away that there's nothing I detest more than communism. I am not a communist. I am not a socialist. Actually, Satanism is the most vigorous, most complete repudiation of that ideology. My Satanism, that is. But anyway, that's really a great little slice of text that Lovecraft, the start of The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft. And he says, just to finish this, he talks about how it was not meant that we should voyage far, far away from what he calls the placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity. But I mean, that's the idea of it was not meant, like who meant that? It's such a... Of course, the implication would be maybe God, that God does not want us to do this or that. But that's completely absurd. God is not a force. God is either a force that should be disobeyed or could not be disobeyed. There's no middle ground, I don't think. If God is, all-powerful, the principle behind existence, then you cannot get away from him. You cannot sin. You cannot really disobey such a thing, because that thing is your very essence. But if you exist in relationship to God in the same way a child exists in relationship to its parent, then maturity and growth and development entails rebellion, entails a quest for independence. So yeah, let me end it there, and yeah, just with a vow to keep this exercise going in the future. So take care of yourself. I hope you feel a little bit more like a Satanist now, and have a nice one. Catch you later, alligator.